everybody. My name is Sam Weeks. I am a full-time admissions consultant helping determined applicants get into full-time MBA programs. Today, I've got Pragya with me. Pragya was a reapplicant this year. So we worked together 2 years in a row to get into business school. Finally.
Yes, finally.
We did it.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about our conversation today because a lot of people who get into programs on the second attempt as reapplicants don't talk about it necessarily. And you hear all these great stories about people getting into great schools, but they don't necessarily talk about the journey that they've been through to get there. So I'm really excited today to hear about Pragya's 2 years of MBA applications and the emotional roller coaster that it took to finally get into Oxford.
Yeah.
Pragya, could you start off, please, by just introducing yourself? Tell us about your profile and everything you think that's important about your MBA application process.
Sure. So my name is Pragya Kumawat and I'm from India. I'm currently working as a marketer with one of the largest e-commerce here. And like you mentioned, I applied twice, but there was a great difference between two applications. So I have a total 5 years of work experience, all of it in marketing, but I'm an engineering student. So I think that's a very common profile here in India. And then I decided to do MBA. And apart from that, I'm really into a lot of community work. So yeah, that is the things that I mentioned, and that is all about me. Yeah.
Right. And because we have to talk about the stats, because MBAs are so focused on stats, I wanted to just throw out there, GMAT was 710, yeah?
710, yes.
710, 45 quant, 41 verbal.
Yes.
Right? And GPA was 6.4 out of 10, which is fairly strong, but something that you addressed in your application.
No, I was really worried about that part. I mean that, okay, GPA, because I've always heard that UK colleges pay a lot of attention on GPA. So that was, I think, one of my weak point in the application. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the journey that you went through then. Like, as we've touched on, you applied twice. That must have been an emotional roller coaster for you.
Yes.
So can you tell us about what sort of your thought process your mindset going into the process, and then some of the highs and the lows that you encountered as you went through MBA applications as a reapplicant?
Sure. So I think I would really like to start this journey with GMAT, because that itself took me a lot of time. So I attempted it multiple times. And finally, when I had the score, I was just 25 days away from the second round deadline of Cambridge and Oxford both. So, I mean, that was like a very, very tight scenario. And that's when I approached Sam. And like we curated the application, we tried bringing out all the stories, etc. But as luck had it, we did not make it to Oxford that year or Cambridge. So, but I think during the whole process, I have been very selective about colleges. Like I did not apply to a lot of them. Even last year and even this year, I only applied to 2-3 colleges. And so that was the whole journey part. I mean, first year, I was just exploring and getting into the essays, writing all the stories, extracting all those stories. And then finally, after the rejection, I realized, okay, there may be so many things lacking here. So I worked on them. And then next year I applied again. Yeah.
So can you talk about your school selection and what you thought, what was important to you about schools, and as an Indian applicant, what your perception was in terms of UK versus US, for example, or Europe versus US? And just for readers who are, a couple of years behind you in the process, who are thinking about, where should I apply and how should I think about all these different business schools? What was your thought process?
So from the beginning itself, I did not want to go to US. Lots of reasons. Some of my friends are already there. And so, I mean, those options were already out of questions. I was not thinking about US. And then Europe and Canada remained. So as soon as I thought of Europe, Oxford was the first choice because of, I think, immigration policies of UK currently, and the whole English-speaking country, which is sort of easy as compared to Spain or Germany, where language becomes a barrier. So that was the first thought process behind choosing UK. And so as soon as it came to UK, Oxford was definitely one of the top choices. Cambridge was second. And then after that, Canada was also one of the prospects because of same reasons. And there, I think I chose Rotman there to just have a chance. Yeah, as a
Okay.
fall option. Yeah.
Sure. And so, as we said, you applied in 2 years, several different schools, like quite a long drawn out process, and yeah, adding on the GMAT, as you say, on top of that as
Yeah.
well. What do you think was the key difference between your applications the first year, which were unsuccessful, and your applications the second year, which were really successful?
Yeah.
What do you think was the difference between those two?
I think so in the first year, I was really extracting the stories, etc., etc., and we worked out a lot of instances, and we really worked on some very personal stories. I mean, those were the stories that really changed my direction. But what I noticed was that from an MBA perspective, maybe I'm lacking a bit behind, in terms of my post MBA goals in relation with what I'm currently doing, and my community participation, and also some of international exposure. I mean, I think we had a chat right after I got my thing, and then you were like, okay, maybe possibly these are the weak points, and that's what we discussed at that time. So I took this one whole year to basically reassess myself, and uh, go back one step and analyze, okay, what could be missing here, what is in my control right now that I can change. So the first thing was I switched my job. I went into e-commerce, which was also aligned with my post MBA goals. um, and then I also increased my responsibility in my in the NGO that I've been contributing at. So I was a volunteer, but then I moved up as a fellow, so a lot more dedication, lot more responsibility. And like, I wouldn't say exactly international exposure, but yeah, I did take a few trips here and there. So that really did make a difference. And what I would really like to emphasize here is that doing all this in 1 year, keeping the goal in mind that, okay, MBA is my ultimate goal. I mean, yes, it becomes challenging, but yeah, if you are just, determined, you can do it.
Yeah. So I think what the difference between your first application and your second application was that although your post MBA goals are more or less the same, what you're saying is that they were too much of a stretch in your first
Yeah.
year, given the experience that you had. So by moving jobs, by taking on more responsibility in your NGO, you took that extra little step towards your post MBA goals. So
Yeah.
the schools then looked at your profile and said, okay, current experience, post MBA goals, that's not so much of a leap. And with an MBA up your sleeve and some leadership experience from the program and some marketing experience from the program and some strategy experience from the program, the school thinking, we can put you in that role. So I think for reapplicants who are watching this, who are thinking, should I go through this whole process again? And if so, what should I do differently? I think the lesson from you then is think really seriously about your post MBA goals and take any steps you can to bring you a little bit closer towards those goals. It also lends itself to a really nice reapplicant essay. As we said, your reapplicant essays were all around super strong because you had so much to talk about. You had all these new responsibilities, which obviously is one of the big hurdles facing reapplicants. So that's that's really, really nice.
I would really like to add one thing here, that a lot of reapplicants think about giving the GMAT again, maybe increasing the 10, 12, 20% of scores more. While that is a good strategy, I mean, I don't mind that. But I did not do that because it would have been one added point to this whole 1 year of doing lots of things. So, maybe people can see from that perspective also, that if your GMAT is already strong enough, it's above 710, 720, then maybe you need to focus on some other areas, making them strong.
That's a really good point. I think the thing is, when you went into the application the first round, you did officially have all the boxes ticked. Your GMAT was high enough. As we touched on, your GPA was a little bit low and your GMAT compensated for that. So you did tick the boxes. And so what you're saying is, for applicants who do tick the boxes, but who are still getting rejected in 1 year, maybe you need to focus on job and responsibilities in your extracurriculars, and the bigger picture of your application, which is exactly what you did, and it worked really nicely.
Yes.
So you talked about your personal stories. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, and these highly personal stories. Now, this is something that I was really impressed by when we were working together, about your willingness to go into these personal stories that I think a lot of people think, how is this relevant to business school? But for you, your personal stories, they really added something to your profile. Can you talk a little bit about, we don't need to go into details about what the stories were, but about how the coming out with those stories and talking about those stories affected your business school application, even though they were personal stories?
So actually, if you look at the questions also in the essays, they are just simple questions. They don't mention professional or personal, and it's up to us that we want to mention a professional experience or a personal experience. And during writing those specific questions, I really felt that a personal story really turned things around a lot more than a professional example. So I think that's what gave me the confidence that though it is personal, but still, if it had a bigger impact, then I would mention that. And it has always been emphasized by all the AdCom officers, I think, that they want to know you on a personal level. So it's okay to, just show them what kind of person you are. But also, it should not be completely personal. It can be a mix of both. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really important balance that you struck really nicely, which is keep on the professional essays, giving them what they're looking for in terms of your professional abilities, but also opening up and showing them that you are human. And from a business school perspective, that vulnerability that you're demonstrating, that I talk so much about on my blog and on my videos, around showing vulnerability, because that vulnerability is maturity. Vulnerability and maturity equals leadership. So it's a really important component of the application. I think you did a fantastic job of demonstrating that maturity. And maybe that is also something that came through more in your second application versus your first, because you were a year older, you had been through a little bit more, and maybe that additional maturity was also beneficial. Really interesting. So as we wrap up our conversation now, Pragya, can you touch on what other advice would you give to reapplicants who are daunted by the process? They've already been through it once. They may be a little bit, I don't want to do this again. What would you say to them?
Oh, well, it definitely doesn't get easier. Like the second time feels exactly like the first time. You have to rewrite the whole essays again. I mean, of course, you would know the structure. You have to follow a star format. You have to mention about your results, weaknesses, etc., etc. But it's again a process from scratch. So I would just say that hang in there, do your best, and really reassess it again and again. Give your essays to your close ones, let them have a look as well, and let the best stories come out.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really, really good advice. So Pragya, thank you very, very much for your time today. Really, really nice. I think that hopefully you've inspired a few reapplicants who are recovering from their ding last year, and people who are looking perhaps at Oxford and Cambridge in particular, and Rotman in particular, thinking, Pragya did it. If Pragya did it, maybe I can do it. And hopefully you've inspired a few people. Really, really nice. Thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely rest of your day. And thanks for sharing your experience.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye-bye.